Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm gonna get started a bit early. Well, realize that this is kind of an ad hoc live stream, but I scheduled it for 12:20, and I guess it's about that time anyway. I will be right back. So I hope you guys are doing well this morning. I'm going to be continuing work on the library management system project. I think it's been a few weeks since I dug into this project, and the last few live streams I feel like we made some really good progress. So hopefully we can continue that progress. And let me know what the audio is like. I think that's too loud. Sorry about that. Hopefully it's all good now. I'm gonna put on some music in my own headphones here. Yeah, I hope you guys are doing well. I'm not sure if I updated the description for this live stream, but feel free to join the discourse as well if you're interested in the any long-term questions you have about this project. I've got my vimrc open, which is not what we're going to be dealing with. Okay. So what I want to do today for a couple of hours is take a look at what we have left on the checklist and see if I can make some progress specifically on some of the sort of critical things that we need to get taken care of in the project at this point, including better error handling throughout both the service layer and the web layer. And we had some ideas here about more expressive return types from the service layer. That'll be interesting to look at. And then some basic sort of refactoring. Automapper mappings I'm pretty sure are created, but we can verify that. And then we also talked about potentially doing some query string validation as part of middleware, which will make our methods there much cleaner. And in general, there's some really good support out there with a library whose name I can't remember right now, but we may look at that. Accessibility. Ultimately, I'd like to hook up some monitoring with Prometheus and Grafana, although I think that that'll probably be a separate video. And then potentially looking at implementing a generic repository pattern, running some new tests, look at some things like Redis or something for caching, and then maybe even implementing the elk stack, to which we could use for piping logs, but we could also use Elasticsearch to search in general throughout our library assets. So a number of different things that we could definitely take a look at. To be honest, as usual, I haven't opened this project since the last time we live streamed, which I'm thinking was like 2 weeks ago, maybe a little bit more. Okay, so gotta switch gears and now dive in. I think the first thing that I should do here is just make sure that we're building. I don't think that's going to be a problem at this point. By the way, what changed here? Oh, just the checklist. All right, so we are going to just run .NET build. Actually, I'm going to do a clean and then .NET build. Realize the font on the terminal is a little small. Hope you all are doing well this morning, by the way. All right, so the build succeeded. It's building each project incrementally. Yeah, we got some warnings in the controllers about a few stragglers in terms of the transition to async await. That's just in the web layer. The service layer is completely asynchronous at this point, which is good. Okay, but looks like everything is building. We also ran our migrations last time, so what I do want to do now is make sure as we're developing that the Postgres database is running. And so I'm just going to go into projects. Our library management system is here. We have this Docker compose file, and it's just a bare bones compose for a Postgres instance, single Postgres instance. Nothing really special here, but basically a solid development database. And we're persisting the data to this Docker named volume. And so I think we should just be able to run, well, first if we run Docker PS, we can see if it's running at all. got a few things running which are unrelated actually. So what I'm going to do is just Docker compose up. We'll see if this works. I don't think I need to force recreate anything here. And I'm going to make this a little bit easier to read. Okay, so Postgres is up. I'll keep this pane open, and we'll keep the notes in a separate pane, and then this pane can just go away. And maybe, yeah, okay, that's all good. So now let's just run .NET run in the web project. So what I'd really like to focus on for the next hour and a half, 2 hours, is error handling on one hand, and then cleaning up the actual web layer a bit, because I know we have some broken links in there from the refactor. Well, that's building. When you're running an Alpine container with just tailf to dev null, this was just to keep a container that basically does nothing open so that I could run a shell on it and debug something with a fresh install of Vim on Alpine. My Vim has actually been kind of weird lately. Like when I moved from insert mode into normal mode, if I hit escape, I hit escape like 1.5 seconds before it went back into normal mode, so I'm not sure what that's all about. .NET run. Wonder why the run command is not running here. That's interesting. Let's try to build it from the I almost said resharper from the IDE here. All right, so we're just gonna build. Let me know if anyone's listening, if the sound is okay this morning. I think the last live stream I was running the mic through the built-in mic and it was horrible, sounded horrible. Hopefully this morning it's a little bit better. Okay, so do you know what I might do here is, okay, the watch actually started and cannot find an MS build project with library management system. Specify which project to use with the project option. I thought that's what -p did here, but that's okay. All right, so I think everything's all right. What I'm gonna do is just see what happens if we run .NET Watch inside the web project. Okay. Special dash option is used to limit the end of options beginning of arguments passed. Oh, I see. So we will run .NET Watch run. And if I recall, we decided to run this on a port that's not the default .NET port. Could be mistaken about that. I have a few projects going, but pretty sure that if we take a look, yeah, we're running on 8001 for HTTPS, 8000 otherwise. So maybe what I'll do is I'll try to pull open a browser window as well. Okay, and it looks like we are running. So we're going to run into all types of different problems here after the refactor in the web layer. As you can see, we don't have images as well, but that's a pretty minor thing. Let's see what happens if we click View Catalog. So we're probably going to get an error here. We're getting a null ref in this for each in the Razor page. So it says for each of our asset group and model.pageofassets.results. Probably means that page of assets itself is null. So we could approach today's live stream a few different ways. I could basically just start bug hunting like this, and it looks like all these views are basically going to have different exceptions. We've got a not implemented exception here. branch index. It's got another null ref on page of branches. So let's do this. Let us just take it one bug at a time this morning and work through fixing things in this way. And as we fix the bugs, there are places where there needs to be more significant error handling, which there is certainly anyway. Then we'll just tackle it in that sort of fashion. So we're going to do a little bit of organic bug fixing this morning. So let's take a look at how we might solve this null ref, which is happening when we hit the catalog routes. So what we need to do is I'm going to close everything. This is in our catalog controller. And hey Igor, thank you for coughing into your elbow. If anybody uses Vim and doesn't know about set scroll off, it's nice because it allows you to scroll with X number of lines off of the page, so your cursor isn't all the way at the bottom before you start scrolling. Hey Himanth, good to see you again. Let's play chess again one of these days. I'm a little tired today, but let's get another couple of games in. All right, so we're hitting the index route in our catalog controller. A couple of things we can do here is I should really just be running the debugger from the IDE, and that way we can set breakpoints. But we can get along without it for a few minutes here while we figure out what's null. But ultimately here in a few minutes, I'm just going to run it from the IDE's debugger. But basically, I suspect that the null ref here is either that model is null, which I kind of doubt, but I suspect that page of assets is null, so that when we're calling .results, this is what's throwing our null reference exception. So this route here is let's see what the route is specifically doing. So we're returning a paginated view of all library assets in this case. So we go into our service layer and we get all of our results into this pagination service result object, which you can see is this generic page service result of type library asset DTO. And if the error in that case is not null, then we call into handle service error, which would actually return just a status code of 500 here, which is an internal server error with a message. I suspect that our service layer is working since we don't see that error just yet. But then if the pagination service result data is not null, in other words, if the service result has data and the pagination service data result service result.data.results.any, so if there are results, this could also throw a null reference if data is null, but we're checking for that, and in C# this and Boolean operator here is a shortcut operator, so we actually would just shortcut here and we wouldn't throw the null ref here. But then we save our books is, and notice that books isn't used here. So clearly there are some things that need to be finished here in the controllers. So we're saying pagination result service data.books, where the asset type is book to a list, and videos, where the asset type is a video to a list. And now this is Himanth tomorrow. Yeah, I'd be up for a chess tomorrow. Just send me a challenge on Lichess. If you can find my username again, I think it's just Westman or West Doyle, one of those two. I'd be up for some games. So yeah, so now that I'm coming back to the catalog page, I'm remembering that we talked about this idea of it's 11 p.m. where you are. Yeah. So here we are basically, we're basically 11 hours apart, something like that. Okay. So previously we talked about the idea of these library websites actually all sort of conforming to this interesting layout, which is like this bento box style layout. So if we look at like just any major sort of fancy university's library page, and we look at what their catalogs look like, I'm just on a whim going to Brown. I don't even know if we've actually gone to this one before, but let's look for, search the library for books on whatever. Yeah, so everyone has like this sort of layout where they have different sections depending on the media type. So books and ebooks, journal articles, video, periodicals, etc. Go to any major library, and this is sort of the layout you'll see on their website. I'm not sure why they all do it precisely the same way. It's completely different software as far as I'm aware. It's certainly different front ends, but they all do this sort of bento, as it's called, layout where we have a number of different columns here. I notice it's not really like masonry where we'd have some staggered panels, if you will. Here we've got rows and then columns of slightly different heights, sort of dynamically sized based on the content. I'm not really interested in this type of layout, to be honest with you. But this is all to say that I did want to return the asset types separately, so that we could display them separately in sort of a sane way. All right, so our view model is this asset index model. Page of assets is a new pagination result of type asset index listing model. And then our results is this new list of asset index listing model, each of which contains a list of video DTOs and book DTOs. You're using Vimium? Yeah, I've used Vimium before in Chrome. I'm not sure if it's enabled right now. If you're talking about the Vim key bindings in Chrome. Yeah, it's great. I do like being able to, it's not active in this browser apparently, but if you hit F, for instance, for finding a DOM element and then being able to select it with a keyboard, that's super nice. I agree. All right, so it looks like I kind of halfway started this asset index listing model, which has a list of video DTOs and book DTOs. Rather than have a list of asset index listing model, I think I want an asset index listing model. And page of assets. So what does results have to be here? This is a list of T. So this kind of view model is getting a little bit complicated by the fact that I've got nested lists here, like quite a few nested lists, because I've got a list of any type as the results of any type of pagination result. But within that, I've also got lists of videos and lists of books. So one of the nice things about this kind of layout, I would say, is that you can see you could sort of paginate within each context, within each type. Whereas if I set it up the way that I've started here, we'd essentially have to paginate through list of videos and list of books and then handle their pagination sort of from that outer scope, which I don't love, honestly. So I wonder if we can simplify things here a bit. So let's think about this. Let's see what it would look like. First of all, just return books. So if we were going to return a list of library assets, page of assets is a new pagination result of library asset DTOs. And the problem here is that it doesn't match the expected type library asset index model. So let's figure out where the asset index model should just be a pagination result of library asset DTOs to start. I'm really not concerned with getting overly complex with the sort of view model structure at this point. I kind of just want to get something plausible working and something that's easy to use. It's definitely more important at this point. So we'd have a pagination result of a library asset DTOs here. So our view model is this thing that has a page of assets, and that's basically all that's on the view model at this point. And so instead of a new list of library asset DTOs, here let's just try to return our books. The other thing that we could do here is basically say like var all assets is equal to books dot add range videos. And I think that this is going to be upset because this is an in place thing. That's right. So I think, what about all assets is books.concat videos? I mean, at this point, it's just completely a little bit stupid, to be honest with you, to separate these out into two separate things if we're going to just combine them immediately, and we're not going to do this bento thing right away. I think I would do the bento implementation a little bit differently anyway. All right, so what we could do is actually just save our all assets is the pagination service result dot data dot results. All right, so the other thing is we don't have any library assets in our database right now, so let's add some. And I'm going to add these manually at the time for the time being. And then, as I mentioned, let's use the resharper debugger. Just going to build to make sure that's working. Data grip is firing up. I realized I could use data grip from within Visual. I keep calling it Visual Studio JetBrains Rider as well. For the longest time, I wondered what why they chose Rider as the name of the IDE, and it basically means ReSharper IDE. So if you've ever used ReSharper in Visual Studio, that is a very popular tool built by built by JetBrains. All right, so let's try to connect here, see how this works. We're going to connect to Postgres at localhost. Let's call this library management system. Localhost 5432, and let's figure out what the user is from the Docker compose file. Library dev is the database, and admin for our dev database here. So I'm going to test the connection. It looks good. So this should show up in our list of databases here. And then if we just go into library dev, schemas, public tables, here are all of our tables. Here's our library asset table. So what I'm going to do is just add a library asset table. So let us, I'm going to write an insert statement. I'm wondering if they have like a quick helper to do that. It's no big deal. It would just make it a little bit faster. All right, we'll write a new query. Insert into library assets. Let's do title, year. Cost, let's just do it like this. Yeah, that's helpful. Actually, ID should be auto increments or whatever, should just be a series. Sorry about that. Hey, good to see you. Thanks for joining. All right, so we got title, year, status ID. We have some static data that probably needs to be added if we have an enum like status ID in use. Discriminator. I kind of wonder if rather than, hey, what's up, dude? Kind of wonder if rather than insert this manually, I should just get the create form hooked up as well. That might be just as well. We'll leave this open in case I want to do that. In the meantime, if we have an empty list, should not throw null ref. So what we're going to do is see if I can run the run this in debug mode. So here I probably need to set up a build config for this. We will try, what happens if we can't run IS Express here on a Mac, I believe. So I think we're gonna set this up. Yeah, what's up, Doom? You can definitely ask anything you like. Thanks for the message. Application URL, blah, 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 development mode, program arguments, working directory, before launch, build project. Let's give this a shot. It might take some figuring out to get the debugger working here on a Mac properly. Do I plan on putting, or to put mapping view models to DTO by AutoMapper? Yes. Yep, I think AutoMapper, right now we're using AutoMapper, if I'm not mistaken. If we take a look in the service layer, just find an example. And AutoMapper is just doing implicit mapping right now. Because the view model name, the properties in the view models basically have the same names. But we can also look at how to set that up. Yeah, we'll look at that at some point here. It's a really good point. Sorry, just figuring out a few things on the other screen here momentarily. All right. So yeah, let's come back here. All right, so library asset does not contain thing for books. That's right. So here I did have separate asset groups. And an asset group in this case is model.pageofassets.results. So it looks like we kind of did start to set this up. Doom is asking, are you aware of any ORMs that can deal with variable table columns? If you know of any easy way to deal with adding, removing columns from a table without writing raw SQL. Well, if I understand what you're asking here, if you're talking in general about sort of variable table columns, I'm wondering if the type of problem that you're solving would be better suited for something like a document storage database, like a NoSQL database, if you have variable properties, if you will. The second part of your question, where you're saying, do I know an easy way to deal with adding, removing columns from a table without writing raw SQL? So yeah, in that case, typically what's done are migrations. So we have really simple migrations in this project. If we look in the data layer, and then the ORM that we're using in this case, which is Entity Framework Core, is what they call a code first approach to data modeling, meaning that we've defined the so-called columns by writing classes. And so here in this case, the ORM is looking at the public class book. Let's look at an example that doesn't have any inheritance. So we have a hold, and then these four properties on this guy would be, let's look at an even simpler example. Um, okay, library card here. So we got like four properties here. These would be columns in our database. And the magic, if you will, the writing of the SQL is actually happening programmatically thanks to Entity Framework, which is our EF Core, which is our ORM. And so if you take a look at the files that the ORM is generating, they contain they're migration classes actually, and they contain two methods, an up and a down method, which just tells the database what to do when we're moving forward with a migration or when we're rolling back. And so if we're changing columns, like in your question, you ask something like, say, adding columns. So if we need to add a new column, what might need to happen is we have some type of alter table statement that would need to be written in SQL. And there's clearly a few layers of abstraction here, but if we just take a look at an example class here, we can see that the migration builder object is actually using this method create table, which looks like it's just some static method that creates a table with these names. And it's getting these columns, their types and definitions and things from the classes that we defined in our C# classes, what we would call our data models here. And so if you were going to say, okay, I created this schema, I did it in a code first way, I had these initial migrations, and I were to go and say, okay, well, we need a new column here on this one, whatever it is. We need a public string foo get set in order to support some new feature that we built. So in this case, we'd be adding a column, right? So if I were to run the .NET EF migrations add or whatever the command is to actually run a new migration, we'd get a new file here, which would be prefixed with the date and then underscore whatever we named the migration. And when .NET went to go run those migrations, it would run through everything in our migrations folder to get things up to the current state that we're in. So any modification that we make to databases are clearly need to happen in a certain order for us to move from some existing state that we're in to some future state. It's really hard to, it might be impossible to just move from one arbitrary state of a database schema to another, right? We need like some history of how columns were added and removed and data types were changed, any type of altered table that we might have. And so that's sort of the purpose. This is a super long-winded answer, but to answer your question of how do you do that without writing raw SQL, well, that is definitely often the responsibility of an ORM. And there are many different ORMs. Probably most familiar with Entity Framework and EF Core, and each of them have different levels of how do I want to say this? Each of them have more or less responsibility. Some you have to write more code to actually get something working than others. So there are a few, for instance, in Node, which I've worked with that coming from An EF Core background, I felt like required you to write a lot more code to get sort of an equivalent result. But yeah, that's sort of the purpose of these types of ORM. Not the purpose. It's just the purpose of an ORM is object relational mapping. But um, when we're talking about migrations, that's basically the tool that you use. No problem, Doom. I feel like I rambled on way too long there, and that's probably more than you were looking for. But what you're talking about is kind of a hard problem, and that's why we have tools to help us do that and to sort of keep those things organized. Okay, I'm gonna kind of stop rambling for a moment and try to figure out where we are here. On the index, that's this HTML page here. That's right. So in asset group dot for each book in asset group, so rather than, wow, it's just my escape key in general that has this lag. It's not just in Vim anymore. That's kind of a bummer. So for each var asset, we don't have the nested for each now, I don't think. We'll come back to maybe this type of approach if I decide to do it that way. Which I probably will decide to do it that way ultimately. And I'm pretty sure we only have Dewey indices on books. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to super simplify things here for the time being. And we'll figure out what type of setup we want to do to make this a little bit more polymorphic at some point. And a lot of this code is legacy, so we're seeing here some old versions of things. Old versions of, not that old, but old versions of Bootstrap, old versions of data tables, I would presume. All right, whatever, that's fine. Let's try to build again. Hope everyone is staying healthy and doing all right in these COVID days. All right, we succeeded. We'll take care of those straggling non-async async methods in a bit. So let's try again to run our debugger. Should be able to save this somehow. I wish that I could, actually. And I wish that it would stop suggesting that I can use IIS Express, because I'm pretty sure that I can't do that on a Mac. All right, let's give this a shot. By the time I'm done with this refactor, .NET 5 will be live and released, and maybe we'll have to update it again shortly. So if I'm not mistaken, I think that this build configuration that I'm using here will actually be running on that weird default .NET port. I say weird because I think it's a relatively high port number, which is uncommon among other web frameworks. And I can never remember what it is as a result. 59034, is that correct? We shall find out shortly. By the way, I suppose I can stop running this solution if I'm running it from the terminal. Looks like it's hanging from the, what's the debug output here? Oh, it's still loading. Quite slow, I should say. Suppose I haven't actually run the debugger for this project on a Mac before, but all right, so localhost 8000 is still live. We actually want to turn that off. And I wonder why it's hanging on. I'm gonna have to make the text here a bit smaller to read my read what's running here. That's okay. For some reason I have a server instance still running on port 8000 and all right. What's the port that it's supposedly running on? See a bunch of thread exited. It may take a moment here to figure out how to actually, it says the debugger is attached and it's running. For some reason it says it's running IIS Express, which might be part of the problem that we're seeing here. Because I don't think you can run IIS Express on a Mac, pretty sure. 59034, is that correct? Yeah, that's hanging. Let's figure out how to set up a proper build environment for one thing. And the next thing I want to do is figure out what's still running on port 8000. And then I'm going to kill those processes. Don't try this at home, I would say. 17369. Pretty sure that should definitely kill whatever's on 8000, and it does. So that's fine. Now let's figure out how to set up a proper debugging environment here. So .NET Core debugging, I think we would want to call this a build config. So we want to do this inside of Rider. Launch settings. This is what we want. Launch settings.json. Let's see what ours looks like at the moment. Okay, yeah, we got these profiles. We don't want an IIS Express profile, I'm pretty sure. We don't care about IIS settings either. So I have a feeling this may have actually been left over from when I was developing this years ago on a Windows box. So let us take a look at build tools. I wonder where we get to this nice toolbar here. Let's do launch settings.json for cross-platform. As you may or may not be aware, it is still, in this day and age, often difficult to find good examples of how to do certain things that you like to do in the .NET ecosystem. Look how much space they use up. Just as a just as a quick side comment, look at how much space is dedicated to the potentially useful information. So we've got about this much screen and about this much screen. We've got about 2 rems of padding around both of these cards, and just really difficult. I shouldn't be complaining. All right, let's just wing it. Let's figure it out for ourselves, see if that works. Windows authentication false, anonymous in it. We don't want to do any of that. Can I just build a new launch settings.json file? I'm going to rename this one to alt, and then we're going to add a launch settings.json file for ourselves. Okay. And this is going to be our lone environment variable for the time being. So library.web, command name project, not really sure. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and try to run debug now. And we'll see where we get. So the build succeeded. Now front end port is 59228. Could probably configure that as well. It looks like you can configure that here with application URL. I'd like to debug on the same port that startup uses. Localhost 59228. What a struggle it is to debug this project at the moment. Shouldn't be that bad. It's just hanging here. What if I explicitly say HTTP? Hey, Amin, thanks for the message. What if we try HTTPS? Okay. I've had better luck, I think, debugging in Rider when I started the project on a Mac. So maybe what I can actually do here is take a look at another project I've done and take a look at the launch settings for that particular project. So if we go to projects, productive dev, we'll go into NetCore, and we'll go into web, and we need just to find launch settings, right? That's what it's called. Is there no launch settings in this file? There should be. Yeah, there is. Okay. Web properties launch settings. Confused. Oh, properties. Okay, so this is what I've used previously with some success, and I'm pretty sure that looks the same except for the application URL. So maybe what I'll try to do here is to just cat launch settings into my clipboard, and then we'll come up here, and this is library.web project launch browser true. At least it'll launch the browser now, I think. I don't think that was in the previous one. In the application URL, I am going to be consistent/stubborn, and we're going to run this on localhost 8000. Maybe for the debugger, we'll run it on 8003, just in case I'm running something from the terminal. And I don't have to deal with it. All right, so let's run a .NET Clean. Thank you, older project. It's going to build anyway when I try to run the debugger here. So let's cross our fingers that it will pick up the launch settings file, and in fact, I'm going to delete the old one. Is there a way we can look at a debugger settings? Don't know at this point. We're just going to try to run it. Debug library web 1. Debug any CPU, optimize code for debug mode. Let's try it. If this doesn't work, I'll need to find how to point it explicitly to our launch settings.json. If it launches a browser, then we know probably for sure that it's reading from it. See, I always see this front-end port being a different number than I would expect, which is unfortunate. Yes, and as far as I'm aware, this did not actually launch a browser. So we're going to stop here. And we really need to figure out how to get JetBrains to work with this legacy project. Let's see if we can view the debug window. That is just this one, I suppose. Okay, so we're gonna try to find rider, choose launch settings .json/json. Okay, so right. See, it keeps showing us this screenshot where there's this extra toolbar up here with debug any CPU and the selection of the particular configuration, which I'm not seeing. So we need to make sure that I can find that and get it set up. That's really what I need. But this looks like Rider for Windows as well. So maybe that's why I'm not seeing the same toolbar. All right, come on, you shouldn't be this difficult. Hey, Philippe. Yes, I'm back. It's good to see you back as well. Right now, I'm trying to figure out how to get Rider to pick up this launch settings.json file because it does not appear to be using it. We'll find it though. Yeah, I mean, the target framework should be correct. It's obviously, here are the two configurations that we have. bin/debug, optimize code, allow unsafe code. Any CPO, that's fine. Wonder if I need to force it to do x64. I kind of doubt that. Quite a few properties to look through here. Doesn't look like you can search them either. Man, this is interesting. Not really, but it's interesting that it's actually like previously before we had a run configuration. So let's see what happens here. What I'm going to do is go into our properties, come in here into launch settings. We know that we have this if we need it. I'm going to delete it. And if I run debug library.web, shouldn't it ask me like where are my launch settings? I'm hoping that's what's going to happen, but it doesn't appear to be that that's what's happening at the moment. Previously, when we ran this debug from Rider, it opened up a panel for us to take a look at the launch settings, if I'm not mistaken. Rider Mac launch settings. Run edit configurations. Okay. Looks like I'm having the same problem that this person had as well. Support has been added. Well, yeah, I'm sure that it has. So it looks like we need to go to run edit configurations. I agree, Doom. It should not be quite this difficult. Edit configurations. Okay. So we're going to come back into properties, add a launch settings.json file, put the simple one that we have back in here that should run in our app on localhost 8003, add the missing closing curly brace. My escape key is lagging. So run, edit configurations. Now let's try to figure this out. .NET launch settings.json file, library.web. Let's delete these old ones. It's surprising that it keeps them around. We don't want IS Express on a Mac. Application URL is 8003, so it's picking that up. Before launch, it should just build the project. That's good. Wonder if it has support for cleaning the project. It does. We're just going to clean. We should clean everything. I'm not sure why. Whatever. Build should work. Use external console. Okay, I'm going to apply this and just hope for the best at this point. Debug. Stop and rerun. So we'll look at the build output while it's building. I suspect that everything will build properly, and then we'll pop open the debug panel. As far as I'm aware, it has not opened a browser. Oh yeah, Philippe, the pagination thing. Yeah, I ended up not using DI for that, at least at this point, because I actually couldn't get the DI container to wire it up properly with the generics, even though it seemed to work properly when I did it for other things, like the automapper generics, for instance. But yeah, uh, even more than anything, I suppose it's just kind of a design decision not to have a particular reason to use dependency injection for the paginator at this point either. Darn, why in the world, even using the launch configuration that we specified, does it not work? Is there anything running on port 8003? Nothing. What about this crazy port that they set up? It does. It's listening. However, it hangs. Whereas if I just run .NET run, this should run on port 8000 with no problem, but it's this debugger inside Rider that I'm currently having trouble with. Let's confirm that .NET Run is not hanging. I suspect that .NET Run is actually working as expected. It'll take just a moment. Gosh, all kinds of 8001 is already in use. Really? Okay, that is true. So, what a mess. We're going to kill what's on. I just got this message. .NET quit unexpectedly. It looks like we're having some serious framework issues this morning. What's running on port 8001? Kill those processes. 17.369. 29055. I think I may have killed what was running on HTTP and not what was on HTTPS. Both of these are gone. Let's look at what's running on 59428. Okay, nothing is running on 59428. It shouldn't be hanging now either. Okay, so that's good. Am I using a front-end framework for this project, asks Doom. This project I'm not. So this is a legacy project, and when I originally built it, it was just built using Razor front-end. And I'm just continuing with Razor at this point. An idea I have for this project is to use Blazor perhaps, and so maybe we'll move over there once that's done. Right now my goal is to get this thing able to be debugged and run cross-platform, and once we get it back to that sort of stable state, then I'll definitely consider potentially revamping the front end and using something like Blazor, I think. All right, so why when I debug, we're going to go back to the manual menu now, run, edit configurations, launch settings.web profile. What happens if I remove this one and we just have this one? Profile parameters are set by library web launch settings.json. That's true. I see. I wonder if it was running this .NET project version. So there should only be one way that it can debug now if it's actually reading those. So see this debug library.web parens1. What is that? We need to figure this out. This is a little frustrating, but we'll figure it out. Library.web. This is the launch settings version. This is what we want to run. It's interesting. We'll know that it's reading our launch settings when it launches a browser. front end port 59600. It just chooses. I wonder if this is just some ephemeral port, but I'm not sure what it's used for, to be honest with you. Not exactly how I had planned to spend most of this live stream figuring out how to get rider debugging properly, but apologize for that. Just something we have to work through together. So I'm going to stop it again. 59600. Should be nothing running on 8003, which is what I want it to be running on. Should be nothing running on 8000 either. Okay. .NET launch settings, profiles. This looks like it should be so straightforward. Run. Edit configurations. What is this? Debugging actions. Edit configurations. It keeps creating this separate. Oh, that's interesting. It's like the same. I did not create this. I did not create this one. I wish that I could explicitly say run this now. Save the configuration. Did I literally just have to say save there the entire time it wasn't saved? Apologize for boring you guys with this part of the process. Now it's running on front end port 59658. What is this JetBrains front end port? Oh, that's the JavaScript debugger. Build succeeded. But it does not actually launch the project, it seems. Is it launching on port 8001 now? Does it just ignore the application URL if I had it explicitly set in startup or program.cs rather? Let's find out. We should be able to find out just by hitting a breakpoint. So let's put a breakpoint on the index action of our catalog controller and then go to catalog. Hey, it hit it. Okay. This was a little more frustrating than I would have liked, but what are you going to do? Like Doom says, it is part of the dev process, unfortunately. This is true. This is good insight, actually. All right, so what we're going to do is figure out what the debugging tools look like here. Okay, so we're going to step over pagination service results. Let's see what happens. That took quite a long time. The data is just an empty list, so no problem. We just don't have any assets, but the service did not blow up. And now we're coming down to saying we're going to give the front end an empty model. So we'll continue. And now we are hitting our null ref from the debugger. So this is good. All right, so for each var asset in model page of assets.results, So let us do a couple of things here. First, I'm going to set our breakpoint here. So yeah, page of assets.results. We just have a new pagination results DTO here. This needs to have results on it of an empty list. And what's the other part of a pagination result? Is that some type of error? Oh, sorry, per page number. Doesn't really matter what it is here. Progress. And this just says page. Should probably be consistent with that. All right, cool. So with that set up, let's stop, rebuild, and debug again. All right, so now we have a way to debug our code from within Rider on a Mac. It doesn't depend on iOS Express. Things are looking up. So I'm probably going to work on this here for another 20 minutes or so. Just part of the process, making sure that our tools are working as expected so that we can make sure that we can debug productively. Okay, it should be running. Let's hit the catalog page, find out where our next error would be. Should hit a breakpoint here with the view of the empty view model. Should probably actually be able to put breakpoints inside of the catalog page as well, if I'm not mistaken. Razor's a little weird, to be honest. I'm not going to worry about it. We're just going to hit continue. Hey, now we don't have our null ref, and we have this absolutely beautiful library catalog. Which clearly I'm being a little bit sarcastic there, but it's working. We don't have any data. We don't have a design team. But yeah, there'll be no problem tidying that up when we do have some data. So let's fix the patrons page now. So here we get a not implemented exception on patron controller line 30. So let's take a look at our patron controller. And before we do that, I'm going to make a commit. Yeah, we need to go into edit that example that I did in library card. Otherwise, everything is looking good. So let's come back to here. This was for Doom's question. Oh, that's right. Last time we also looked at this internal nlog thing as well. So we're actually using nlog, which I kind of forgot about. Add launch settings. .json. It's actually more like modify. We fixed the little null ref. Nothing to write home about, but now we need to make sure that this unimplemented exception gets taken care of. This is in patron controller line 30. Come on, Ryder. Oh, poor Ryder. It's not really impressing me this morning. All right, so let's go to line 30. not implement an exception when we're hitting the index for our patrons. So here, how do we do this? Return new view model. I think it's just return new view actually. How do we do it in the catalog controller? Empty model, asset index model. Where is this one coming from? This should come from our views. Sorry, our models. Patron index model is what we want. And we're going to do something very similar with our service result here in this case as well. It's actually going to look basically like this in our patron controller, except that we're going to say if service results dot error is not equal to null, handle the server error with that service result. Bring in link or entity framework extensions or whatever that came from, and then service result results to list, bring in generic collections. I think it's catching up here, no? What's the problem? I want the extension method invocation. I don't know about that other one. Actually, the other one's probably fine. Here dot any. I don't want to use this enumerable extensions. Why does it keep doing this? Ryder, you're driving me crazy this morning. Patron DTO here. Patron index model. Bring this one in. Here we need a page of patrons. So this will be similar to our catalog index model, or asset index model, I should say, where we have a pagination result of the same. So patron index model will be our patron DTO, page of patrons. Okay. And we return that view model. Okay. So presumably we get a page of patrons back now. Yes, this needs to be a patron index model. Page of patrons. This is going to look very similar for all of these in these 4 or however many index actions that we have. Patron DTO, patron DTO. So we just have an empty list of patrons in the case that we have null service result data. So that was a sort of paradigm I chose, where if the service result data is null, but we don't have an error, then basically that's the service result telling us it didn't find anything. And so if this were like a typical REST API, in that case, we might return like a 404 response, and then we could have the view layer, which we're essentially working on here, the web layer, handle that appropriately. In this case, the appropriate action is just handled directly in the controller, which is just to display an empty list. But again, we could change that if we wanted. Maybe we make all view models able to display some type of particular UI when we have such a case like a 404 or something like that. Likewise for any other type of error as well, like 500 or whatever. Okay, so we'll stop. We always need to stop and restart when we're working on the back end. Try again. And let's take a look at what's actually happening in the patron view for the index anyway. So here we're going to have to change this as well. For each patron in patron.page of patrons, we're going to switch this up a bit too. I mean, this is essentially, once again, very similar to the catalog index. So we have a library card. Overdue fees I had in there. So yeah, I was probably sort of whatever you want to call it, instrumenting the view models with these additional properties, like the overdue fees that we could sum on the user, their home library, that sort of thing. So I kind of like that actually. What we're going to do is we'll come back into our patron DTO, and we can add those actually. This is just to help me remember what they're called. Int library card ID. We can do decimal overdue fees, and home library we could just pass like the name. Thank you guys for watching this morning. I'm running kind of low on sleep, so I apologize if I'm not super sharp this morning. And so to someone's question previously about AutoMapper, we could wire AutoMapper up to serialize into those additional properties that actually aren't on the data model, of course, things like the overdue fees and that sort of thing on a per user basis. Or we could put them on the data model as well and maybe make that live a little bit closer to persistent storage than it does currently. So, right, so we fixed that. Let's go ahead and build. Okay, and now let's go ahead and debug. So what do we do this morning? We created a proper launch settings.json, which should work cross-platform now. That's excellent. We fixed a null ref on the catalog page, which allows us to actually visit that link now without it blowing up. And we fixed a not implemented exception that was being thrown tentatively on the patron index. So let's see what's up with this now. Hey, so now the patron index works. Again, we don't have any data that we're working with. In the next live stream, I'm actually going to work on the more of the CRUD pages, like the create a new patron, which, if I'm not mistaken, I don't even believe was part of the original project. As I've looked around, I mean, I haven't seen any evidence that that was the case. If it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like there is. It looks like there's certainly some files in here. Like I intended to do this 3 years ago, but never did. So we're gonna wire that up as well. So now we should be able to hit home. We can hit catalog. Again, we don't have any data here. We hit our breakpoints. I'm going to remove that. We can hit our catalog. Looks pretty bad, but it works. We can hit our patrons. Branches still blows up. So I think the last thing I'll do this afternoon is fix this null ref, which is for branch in model page of branches.results for the branch index. So let's go ahead and we're essentially going to do the same thing here for the branch controller. Starting to actually have fun with the refactor at this point, in that we're now wiring up the actual behavior that we spent so much time on during the refactor up to this point. All right, so here's the index for the branch controller. Branch index model. It looks like I am actually returning this, but we need to, once again here, say results. If it's an empty model, is a new list of branch detail models. Page is still page, and per page is still per page. Dun, 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 dun. Branch models is a new, yeah, this isn't even hooked up yet, so this is a huge to-do. Yeah, this is a huge to-do over here. Probably requires some additional thought about the view model. Guy Incognito is making the excellent point that we will finally be finished and updated with to 3.1 just in time for 5.0. True. The good news is that the upgrade from wherever we were 2 or whatever to 3.1 was actually wasn't trivial, but it was pretty straightforward. And most of the work has been gone into actually the refactor of the code. So hopefully the upgrade to 5 will be relatively straightforward. I'm looking forward to it. All right, so we're going to run the debugger. I have a feeling build's going to fail because we need to check out the view for the branches. No, the build succeeds. That's good news anyway. Branch index model. Yeah, I need the view, buddy. For each branch in the model page of branches.results. Branch, do you work? And the branch page finally works again. So we got branches, we got patrons, we got catalogs. The design looks completely different here, but I'm not sure what that's all about. Yeah. So now we have sort of a working base of an application to start working against now. There's a few things come to mind that I need to definitely work on next time. It's cool that we started up Postgres, but we didn't actually need to use that very much. What I'm going to do here is take out our checklist. The other thing we need to do is actually implement our pagination on the razor view. So we should have more or less the infrastructure to set that up. It's just going to take a little bit of code to make sure that we implement that properly. We talked a little bit about that bento design that's so prevalent among all these other library management systems. Let's look at another one. I wonder if all the universities are just library dot whatever. Library dot Carnegie Mellon dot edu. Probably not. I want to see if everyone does bento. They actually have separate searches for stuff. They have an everything search. So everything search, let's look up John Muir. Let's see if we get bento style results. So they do things differently. They essentially interweave asset types together in a single list. This is actually kind of interesting. Personally, I don't know why. I think I kind of prefer this type of thing and then have some type of faceting on the left-hand side as opposed to having separate regions for each. But in my experience, this is kind of the exception to the rule of the design of what you see out there for big library management systems. You can see they've got books, articles, all types of things. This UI is kind of clunky, to be honest, but it's a university, so that's kind of what you might expect. What's another big school? I went to the University of Delaware, which is not a huge school. I spent a lot of time at this library. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Just want to get a couple of ideas about potential. Oof. This looks a little bit like my website, Entry Level Eng. Shameless plug, self plug. It reminds me of a design that I did recently for my website. I created this website recently for posting entry-level engineering jobs, where you have this sort of card structure. I'm not hugely psyched about the initial design, but it looks like this a little bit. Yeah, so Delaware also has this, looks like interleaved asset type with a single sort of list view. Not a great design either, but anyway, so some things to think about for myself as I start to rewrite the UI for our catalog page and list page of different types of assets that you might have in here. Let me know if you guys have other ideas in terms of like features for this type of system. Yeah, I think that's interesting. NPG SQL, yeah. So I shut down Postgres, so it's blowing up on us. No problems. Let me know if you guys have any other ideas about the UI here, what type of things you'd like to see. Clearly in the original project, I didn't have any way to create patrons or create any other resources in this app. So that'll be a big plus. Even if it's something like just completely different, like I've thought about like hooking up an actual barcode reader and being able to actually physically use this as a library management system for real books, something that just reads barcodes for ISBNs or whatever it is to track assets. That might be kind of fun. I'm not sure right off the top of my head what that would look like, but it actually probably is not that difficult to get set up. So, ideas. Anyway, thank you guys for joining me this morning. We made a little bit of progress today. A lot of it, unfortunately, was just on tooling, but now that that's set up, the subsequent changes that we make throughout this series should be a little bit easier to work with. So stay safe, you guys. Stay healthy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.